Hi everyone, welcome to another video review. Today I'm going to talk about this lens, the new Sony 300 2.8 G Master, and I'm going to compare it against this lens, the Big 6 with the 600 f4 G Master lens. As you can see, it's a beast. And also compare it against this lens, the 2 to 600 f5.6 to 6.3 G zoom lens. Let's talk about these two lenses first because they're closer in size and also closer in price. And the 300 2.8 might be an upgrade for someone who already has the 2 to 600. So what are the differences? First of all, the 300 2.8 is lighter than the 2 to 600. It's noticeable, it's significant. It's also shorter and easier to carry. Well, you might ask that this is a 600 millimeter, but this is a 300. So here I got a 2x. I'm gonna pop the 2x, and then we can see how they compare. So if I put this 2x, add this 2x to the prime to make it 600, you can see that it is still shorter than the 2 to 600, and it's still lighter, and it's easier to handhold and carry around. So definitely a more compact lens. And it's also a third of a stop faster at 600 millimeters. This is f5.6, 600 millimeters. This is f6.3, 600 millimeters. Another difference between the two is that this is a zoom lens, so the focal length is measured when the focus distance is infinity. As the subject gets closer and closer, what happens is that the effective focal length reduces, and that's called the focus breathing. And that's something that this lens shows. You will see it in the test shots, that it has effectively lower magnification than the 300 2.8 plus the 2XTC. So you get a little bit less magnification with this as well, which you have to consider. If you're shooting at close range, that might be a factor. And obviously the autofocus speed on the prime is much faster than the zoom, and that's one area where there is really no comparison at all. The initial acquisition with the prime is like bang on, but with the zoom it takes about half a second. So you gotta plan on this pre-focus. It's not a bad lens, you can still grab some amazing shots with it, but you gotta use the right technique on this one. You need pre-focus, you need to know exactly when the subject is popping and all of those things, versus this one you can get on it real fast and it'll track really nice. So these are the main differences, obvious differences between these two lenses. And obviously the prime is much more expensive than the zoom lens. So what else do you get? How do they compare optically? So I've shot these side by side. You will see the comparison examples later. If you look at the center of the frame and compare the 300 2.8 with the 2x teleconverter with the 2 to 600 at 600 millimeter at 6.3, you will see that the prime is just a little bit punchier, a little bit sharper, but it's really splitting hairs there. It's not day and night difference. It's not something that you can immediately jump at and say, hey, this one is much sharper than that. They're pretty close. When you get closer to the border of the frame, the prime is better, but for bird photography, it's very unusual to put the bird at the corner of the frame, that extreme corner. It's not a really realistic case. But where this pulls ahead is that when the conditions are less than ideal. So when the subject is a little bit farther, there's a little bit more heat shimmers and more imperfect conditions for shooting, low light, flat light, low contrast, that kind of stuff. The 300 2.8 prime with the 2XTC will deliver better images than the 2 to 600. Again, the difference is not day and night. This one is not bad by any means, but there you can clearly notice a difference, that this one is delivering crisper, a little bit more contrastier, punchier image under those specific conditions. But in ideal conditions, control tests, it's really hard to tell a difference, and both of them are great, I would say. They're not, none of them is really bad. So what are the best usage cases for the zoom, and what are the best usage cases for the prime? I think that you should actually own both of these lenses. I don't think the zoom is a substitute for the prime, or the prime is a substitute for zoom. They both have their own applications. The zoom obviously has this distinct advantage that you can zoom back and change the focal length, or zoom in. Versus with this one, you got three choices. You got to make up your mind before you start shooting. Either you go 300 2.8, or you go 420 f4, or you go 600 f5.6. And if in the middle of a shoot you decide to change the focal length, take out the TC or swing a TC on, good luck. By the time you do that, the subject is gone, and you'll be holding the lens pointing at nothing at that point. So this is a rapid focal length change. This one requires time to put the camera down, take the TC out, or add the TC to change the focal length. And in some cases where you're shooting something that is extremely erratic, and the shooting distance is also random and erratic, like good examples, if you're shooting something that's behind a cliff. So imagine you're shooting maybe like a peregrine eyrie or something like that, and the birds just pop from behind the cliffs. You don't know where they're gonna pop from. They can be popping really close, or they can be popping farther. And with this one, you basically can bang, zoom in and out, and then basically get the bird in the frame, fill the frame, and get a really nice shot. Versus this one, if you put in the 2x, obviously you're gonna miss the close shots because the bird is too close. If you take out the 2x, you're gonna miss the far shots because the bird is too far. So this one has that advantage that in those particular situations where the bird can pop at random distances without you seeing it first or knowing, this one is the better lens actually, and will get you more keepers. The 300 2.8 is great for conditions where light might be low. For example, you're going to Alaska at winter time, and then you're shooting something relatively large and close like eagles, or shooting osprey or something like that. Then you can use the 2.8, and basically you can get away in very, very low light and come up with really good images. This one cannot do that because the maximum aperture is 5.6, so it's like 2 stops slower than that. So low light situation, this will win hands down. And also for conditions where you don't need the 600 millimeters, so you can use it bare, or you can use it with a 1.4 TC, then it becomes sharper and sharper compared to this one. So at bare lens 300 2.8 versus this, there is no contest. This one knocks it out of the water. And when you put the 1.4, this is still pretty sharp. It is still visibly sharper than the zoom lens, obviously, at 420 millimeters. So it wins that contest as well. And the autofocus speed on this one, as I mentioned, is much, much faster. You can grab things much faster. So if you're shooting at 600 millimeters, you still want to pick the 300 2.8 plus the 2x TC, because the optical quality, as I explained, just a little bit better. In ideal conditions, maybe they're very, very close, but in less than ideal conditions, this one pulls ahead, and autofocus on this one much, much faster. And then both of these are hand-holdable lenses. Anybody can hand-hold these pretty much all day long. And this one is lighter and easier to hand-hold. So in fact, when I go shooting with this, I'm hand-holding this for hours and hours, and I don't even remember, I have a 600 millimeter f5.6 equivalent in my hands because it is so light and so compact. So much, much nicer to handhold, much, much nicer to swing, much, much nicer to work with over an extended period of time, all day long shooting. So it has that advantage too. And it's also, you can take the TC out, and it'll be a lot shorter, more compact for travel, a lot easier to carry around and store, all of those things. So definitely superior to 600 for most situations, except for very particular cases where, as I mentioned, the subject can randomly pop at different distances. You don't have any time to basically put the TC on or take the TC out beforehand. Then the zoom will get you more shots. And there are some conditions like those that photographers who want to photograph some specific subjects, they'll encounter those. So for those situations, I'll pick this one. But for anything else, I'll pick the 300 2.8, and I put a 2x TC. And I have no reservation, no hesitation whatsoever using the 2x TC on this guy. I've used it quite a bit, and I'm quite happy with the results. Now, what about this guy, the 600 f4 or the Big 6? Can the 300 2.8 with the 2x TC match the sharpness and the quality of the 600 f4? The answer is no. As I will show in the comparisons, this one will look sharper and punchier and it's easy to tell when you zoom to 100% which photo is coming from which lens, which is expected. As you can see, this is much bigger lens, a lot more optics, and double the price of this guy. So it's not really logical for this to give you the same quality as this. But it's not that far behind. So sometimes, usually when you compare something against 600 f4, it makes everything else look pretty bad, to the point that you don't want to use it. But that's not the case here. Even with the 2XTC, this one is not day and night worse than that. The difference is there and you can see it, but this is not unusable. It's not bad. It's not excellent, but it is great. And as I'll show in the side-by-side examples and test shots that I took, you can tell difference. If you measure the MTF, if you measure the PSF, I'm pretty sure you can measure something, you can measure a difference, but it is not that far behind. It is not that bad. It's pretty darn good. But this one is excellent. So this one is also obviously f4 versus this is going to be 5.6. And this one can go to 1200 millimeters with that 2XTC. I've used it quite a bit at 1200 millimeters. I can get sharp shots. I have a detailed article about the tricks of how to get sharp shots at 1200 millimeters on my blog. You can read it. It's not point and shoot. It's not something that you just go out at 1200 millimeters and point your lens at something and you can get sharp shots. It's not the case. You need to be careful about a few factors that I mentioned on that article. So I encourage you to go read that. But if you pay attention to those issues that I mentioned, you can get pretty darn good shots with this one at 1200 millimeters. And sometimes the birds are just far. Some species are very skittish. And unless you're inside a blind or using some kind of baiting, you're not going to be able to get close to them. So you got to use this. So this remains the best overall lens for general bird photography. No question about that. It's got the power, it's got the reach, it's got the autofocus, and this is, for me, this is really easy to handle. I can handhold this thing all day long with no problem at all. But I understand it could be a little bit heavy for some people. It could be a little bit difficult to swing this when you're hand holding it. So in that case, if you can't hand hold this one for flight photography, your second best is this lens with the 2XTC, because this one pretty much everybody can hand hold. If you can hand hold this, then yeah, this is your lens, no question about that. This is basically across any brand, whether you shoot with Sony, Nikon, or Canon, you want a 600 f4 for general bird photography if that's what you want to do and you want to get the best results. So this remains the best lens, and this one with the 2XTC, as I mentioned, can't quite match that, but it's not that far behind. But there are some conditions where even if you own both of these, you may want to pick the 300 2.8. What are those conditions? The first one is when you're shooting from a vehicle or a boat with limited space around you. So this one is big. Imagine you're shooting from a window back of a truck or something, and you want to swing it around. You got to hit the frame of the window because this is a huge lens, and it's also hard sitting in a vehicle and kind of like leaning back and like going panning with this thing. If you've tried it, you know what I'm talking about. It's not very easy. So usually what people do is they put a beanbag on the door and you just rest it on the beanbag and you try to go for like takeoff shots or landing shots or stationary shots. It was pretty hard to like swing this thing from a window on a car or a truck or SUV to follow something. Same on a boat. If you're on a boat with other people next to you, the space is limited and you want to basically swing this around, you're going to hit the next guy and next person, and you don't want to do that, so it might be too much. The other thing is travel. So this is a pain to travel with this lens on the regional jet because the usual roller bags that this thing fit in, they don't go on the overhead bins in the regional jet, so you don't want to check it. So unless you have some kind of special bag that you can fit this and it can still fit on the overhead bin, good luck traveling in a regional jet with this thing. It's going to be tough. But this one, you can put it on a tiny bag that goes under the seat. So on the, for example, CRJ aircraft, I got like this little bag that I put this, even if the overheads are full, I just put it under the seat. It's that small. And for shooting from a vehicle, this is much easier because it's tiny, so you can swing it. You don't have to use the beanbag. You don't have to like be anchored. You can just swing this from the opening, window opening, easily up and down, left and right, and actually track something and shoot something when it's moving. Same shooting from a boat, much easier. When there are people around you, you have a much easier time basically swinging this lens, and uh, basically a lot more comfortable. So in those particular situations, I would definitely pick this, because sometimes you just can't take this. No matter how good it is, you can't take it. So you may want to take this one. And the other condition is again f2.8. If you can get close to the subject, if the subject is large and the light is really low, 2.8 versus f4, you got one more stop of light. So that comes into play, and you can basically get some shots with this one if you use it bare that you may not be able to get with this, because you have to either drop your shutter speed or the ISO will be too high. But overall, basically, if you want to get into bird photography and you want to get your first serious lens, I recommend you get this one first, and then the 300-8 second. And unless you can't really, you want to do flight photography, you want to hand hold your lenses, and you can't really swing this for extended period of time, then basically you have no choice. And I don't think you will be unhappy with this one. It's not as good as this, but it's still pretty good. It won't limit your creativity and your talent to get the great shots with this one. And today's autofocus, something like the A1 or the A9 series, you're gonna have no problem locking on and tracking a subject at f2.8. It's a piece of cake for these cameras. With the 2XTC even at f5.6, it's a piece of cake. There's no problem at all. The autofocus doesn't slow down in a way that impacts your productivity in the field. It's pretty good. So basically, going back between the three lenses, I think you should own all three of them, because each of them has a particular application that neither the other two are not going to be able to get that shot in those very specific conditions. So I think you should have all three. But if I were to prioritize them and see which one you should have first, if you can't, you should go for the 600 f4. If you can't, between the 300-8, let me get this here, and the 2-6, I would recommend the 300-8. There are some situations where this guy, as I mentioned, will be doing better, but overall this is a better lens. It's got faster autofocus, it gets you f2.8, and at 600 millimeters it's a little bit faster. It doesn't have focus breathing, it has faster autofocus, and it's optically just a little bit better, especially for conditions that are less than ideal. So between these two, if you have to have one, I would go for this one first. But yeah, generally speaking, this first, then this one, and then the zoom. This is in the order that I would acquire them, and I would not, if I have any of these, I would not trade it for the other one. I would keep it and get the other one as well, to have that and use it in the for the condition that it is best for that particular application. Okay, so we're gonna talk about, I'm gonna show you some of the test results between these three and also these two, and I'm gonna blow up those pictures and talk about them so you can see how does the sharpness compare between this guy and this guy and this guy. So you're looking at a comparison between the 600 f4 and the 300-8 post to 2x teleconverter. I wanted to create something that looks like a bird, so I ordered these game feathers from Amazon.com, and I glued them on a piece of paper and put them on a wall. I used tripod and the flex shooter head for this comparison, so the rigs are pretty stable. And I took 10 test shots with each combination and picked the sharpest one just to rule out vibrations or any other thing that might have happened. These are shot with the Avon full-size RAW 50 megapixels. It's ISO 400. With the 5.6 combo, you have to use a slower shutter speed, but as I mentioned, the rigs are on rock steady heads and tripods, so there's no impact from using a slower shutter speed.
And here we are looking at 100% RAW in Capture One Pro. Let me zoom this back. So this is a whole frame, and then I'm zooming into 100%, meaning 1 pixel on the sensors, 1 pixel on the monitor, and I'm using a 32-inch LG OLED reference display. This doesn't have any scaling or anything like that, so 1 pixel on the image, 1 pixel on the screen. And if we move around a little bit to see the differences, we can identify a number of differences between these two images. The right-hand side, which is the 604, is punchier and contrastier around the details. You can see it here in this area uh, compared to the left-hand side. You can see that these single strands of diagonal feathers pattern here, feather patterns, are a little bit sharper on the 600 f4 than they're on the 300-8 plus the 2x teleconverter. In this area here, this is kind of like another kind of feather, and you can see the patterns here have more contrast than the ones on the left hand side. And if we move around, by the way, you can hold the shift key and capture one, and then the two images will move synchronously. Again, you can see here that there's a little bit of more contrast here in the 600 f4. But what I wanted to mention, and should be visible, is that the difference between these two is by no means day or night, by no means significant. It's a minor difference. So it's not like there are some details that the 600 f4 was able to render and the 300-8 plus the 2x was not able to render. So if we zoom in more, now we zoom into 200%. And this is kind of beyond the point of pixelation, really. But if we compare these like really low contrast, like single strands of feather, these are really hard for any lens to really render. And if the lens is a little bit uh, imperfect, these areas are going to have chromatic aberration. I'll just turn into like a mishmash in the halo. But you can see here that the 300-8 plus the 2x is still able to render all of these single strands I'm talking about, like this one and this one where my mouse is, and you can see them here. There's just a little bit less contrast on these. And then this area here, maybe there's a little bit even more contrast, but this is kind of like micro detail now we're talking about. This was also shot outdoor, so maybe just a tiny bit of vibration here would kind of like smear it on this left-hand side. But you can see that they're really close, and you can tell a difference, but it's not a big difference at all. And let me zoom back. Uh, and you're not going to present your files like this. You either are going to downsample them to some like a 4K size for screen viewing or make a print. And even if you crop it, the A1 is 50 megapixel. If you crop it, 50%, you still have 25 megapixels left, and the 4K is 8 megapixels. So you're going to be downsampling. And after that and sharpening, it would be pretty much impossible to call out which file came from which lens. It would be almost impossible. And with a little bit more contrast and sharpening, they'll equalize more, and there would be very little practical difference between these two after processing the files to the desired output size, I would say. And you know, choosing between the two, obviously there's a lot more to it than sharpness. The 600 f4 has one stop more light. It can uh, basically reach 1200 millimeters and all that. But if you were to pick up one of these two lenses, let's say you have both of them right in front of you for a given subject, you have 600 f4, 300-8 with the 2x on it. Which one would you pick? You wouldn't pick either one of them for sharpness because that's going to be a wash at the end of the day. What you're going to want to pick the right lens based on is other factors such as your subject, what are you shooting, uh, how is it moving around, how fast it is, that kind of stuff. So it's not based on, okay, I'm gonna pick the 600 f4 because it's just like so much sharper than the 300-8 plus the TC. So I want this one unless I can't possibly or physically use it, then I'm gonna resort to the other one. Here, that's not the case. You don't pick based on, oh, I want this one because it's so much sharper. You pick the one that is right for that job, and sharpness is not one of those criterias. Like if you're shooting from inside of a vehicle, you would probably pick the 300-2.8 plus the 2x in no time because you can maneuver a lot better from inside of a vehicle or on a boat or on in a helicopter or something like that. If you want to put it on a tripod and sit in a blind, then yeah, you might pick up the 600 f4 because you may put a 2x and get to 1200 millimeters, something like that, and then you're not swinging it really. It's just like, anchored on a tripod. So you kind of have to pick based on other criteria. So here's the conclusion. Is there a difference? Yes, there's a difference in sharpness between the 600 f4 and 300-2.8. Is it a big difference? No, it's not a big difference. It's a small difference. You can see it when you view the files at 100% side by side in a control test, but it will not have any practical implication in the field because in the field other factors kick in like how perfect the focus is, what is the shutter speed you use, all the factors add up and they basically kind of add to uh, factors that impact the overall quality. And then once you add those, it will probably be a wash between the two. And I wouldn't really worry about the sharpness of the 300-2.8 plus 2x. You can make great photos with it, and you can make large prints, and you can make as tight of a crop as you can with the 600 f4. So yeah, that's the basically that's my observation about these two lenses. And here I obviously use the same 2x teleconverter for both of them, so it's not like a sample variation or anything like that. Okay, so I'm gonna put this on the website. Sometimes it's hard to tell sharpness um, in a YouTube video because there's compression, there's resampling, and all that. But you can look at the image on my website and take a look for yourself.
Finally, one last comment is that I like this lens for photographing swallows and purple martins in flight. I find that this lens is the best lens for that particular application. The reason is that the autofocus is really fast and the lens is very light and compact, so you can pan it rapidly really easily. The zoom lens is not ideal for these birds because the autofocus is not really fast enough and it has a hard time keeping up. The 600 f4, the issue with that lens is that the bulk and the size and the weight of the lens makes it difficult to pan it rapidly. And for those birds, you have to get on it really fast because you only have a fraction of a second to lock on it before it completely disappears and it's gone from the frame, so it'll be impossible to track. But with this lens, I find that it's much easier. I also use a special trick that helps capture those birds in flight. Basically, you have to configure one of the buttons on the camera to save a preset focus distance, and then basically recall that focus distance by pressing a button so the lens pops into that focus distance where you expect the bird to be. So when you are raising your rig in anticipation of locking on the bird, the focus already is at the correct position. I talk about this trick in the guide that I wrote with Artie Morris about the science and art of bird photography with Sony cameras, and we explain in that guide how you can set up your camera to perform all these custom functions. And you can do that with both A9 III or A1. For A1 you need firmware version 2, which enables this new feature where you can record a focus distance. You can in fact record multiple focus distance and switch between them rapidly by just pressing a button. And that really helps for photographing some specific species in some specific conditions, such as swallows and purple martins. I hope you enjoyed this review, and please check my blog for the pictures and for more information. Thank you.